Russian storm in Polaroid. Living with an autistic child is challenging, but she made it worth it. Chapter 1. The Swing and the Lens. Elena Robertson sat with her head in her hands, fingers knotted in her hair, her pulse pounding with frustration. Another nanny gone. Another voice on the phone from school. Another reminder that her daughter, Piper, was never going to fit neatly into the mold the world kept trying to shove her into. She lifted her eyes across the park. Piper sat alone on the swing, not moving, just holding the chains as though they were her only anchors. 12 years old now and still so heartbreakingly withdrawn. Elena's chest ached with the same prayer she whispered every day, please, let her be happy. Just a little bit normal. Just a little bit free. She had left her office in a rush after the call, heels still pinching, blouse rumpled. But none of that mattered. Piper mattered. And the sight of her daughter isolated again was enough to shred her heart anew. Across the green, Alexei Volkov crouched low in the grass, her camera poised. A butterfly hovered midair, wings trembling against the sunlight, and Alexei's finger pressed the shutter in perfect silence. She lived for moments like these, little bursts of truth captured forever in her lens. She rolled onto her back to angle a shot of the walking path when she felt a tap on her shoulder. Turning, she found herself squinting into the halo of sunlight around a small figure. A girl. The brilliance behind her made her look almost ethereal, and before Alexei could stop herself, she raised the camera and clicked. The girl tapped her arm again, pointing to the camera. Alexei smiled softly, lifting it so Piper could see the viewfinder. The child leaned forward, hesitant but curious, eyes darting with sharp intensity. Alexei guided her hands gently, showing her where to press. Piper did. The shutter snapped. Piper squealed, the sound bright and startling, and then she sat down right beside Alexei. "What's your name?" she asked. The photographer blinked in surprise. "Alexei. And yours?" "Piper Robertson." "Where do you stay?" Alexei's heart caught. The way Piper spoke, unguarded, fragile, determined, told her more than words. But before she could answer, a shadow fell over them. "I'm sorry," came a voice, soft and apologetic. This is the first time she's ever spoken to anyone. Alexei turned, her pulse stumbling. The woman standing there had exhaustion etched in every line of her face, but her eyes carried oceans. Tears threatened, and dark circles told their story of sleepless nights. "I have experience with autism," Alexei heard herself say, her voice husky. The woman lowered onto the bench. Piper remained beside Alexei, clutching the camera like treasure. Something reckless stirred in Alexei then. Something she never did with strangers. "You can bring her to my studio. I can show her more about photography." She pulled a card from her bag and offered it. Elena hesitated only a moment before taking it. Piper was still smiling. That smile, God, it was rare enough to make Elena's throat burn. Then came the impossible. Piper stood, crossed the grass, and wrapped her arms around Alexei. A hug. Not a meltdown. Not screaming. A hug. Elena's jaw fell open. Alexei froze, breath caught. Only when Piper lingered, holding her tighter, did Alexei return the embrace, cautious, gentle. When Piper finally turned and walked toward the car, Elena mouthed a silent promise over her shoulder. "I'll call." Alexei stayed seated in the grass long after they were gone, her mind torn open by memory. Yelena. Her sister, 17 years gone, brilliant and fragile, lost to an icy cliff and a car that never made it home. The grief was an old scar, but seeing Piper cracked it open again, raw and vivid. Brushing grass from her jeans, Alexei rose and walked back toward her office, her pulse still stumbling in strange new rhythms. Chapter 2. The Call. The next morning, Alexei's phone buzzed against the wooden table. An unknown number. She frowned, then answered with her usual crisp professionalism. Alexei Volkov. The voice on the other end faltered, familiar yet hesitant. "Miss Volkov, this is Elena Robertson. We met in the park yesterday." "Call me Alexei," she interrupted gently. "Alexei then. Piper hasn't stopped talking about you. She insisted I call. Alexi's lips curved before she could stop them. The idea of Piper still carrying yesterday's light warmed something deep inside. It would be a pleasure to have her at my studio today. Truth be told, I could use an assistant. On the other end, a muffled squeal, Piper's unmistakable excitement. Elena's voice followed, tinged with disbelief. We'll be there at 10. When the soft knock came at her office door later that morning, Alexi already knew. She set aside the loupe she'd been using to inspect prints. Come in. Her assistant peeked in. Your 10 o'clock is here. Alexi stepped out, and there they were. Piper, beaming, running straight into her arms, wrapping tight around her waist as though she belonged there. Alexi bent down, brushing Piper's hair back. Heya, Piper. How you doing? Elena stood behind, eyes wide with shock. Watching. Always watching. Want to see the cameras again? Alexi asked softly. Piper nodded fiercely. Alexi led them into the back room, where shelves brimmed with cameras and spare parts. Piper's eyes lit up like stars, darting from one lens to another. Elena drifted closer, her scent trailing like something dangerous and delicate, floral, sharp, unforgettable. She whispered, voice trembling, "This is the first time in 12 years I've seen my daughter smile like this." Excited about something. Alexi's throat tightened. She glanced at Piper, then at the mother whose gaze carried both awe and fear. If you'd like, Alexi offered, careful, steady, you can leave her with me for the day. I'll show her how it all works. Elena's lips parted, hesitation flickering. She looked at Piper, who was now running her hands reverently over a polished cannon body. The decision hung in the air. Finally, Elena exhaled. I don't want to impose. You're not. Alexi's voice was firm, but warm. It would be my pleasure. And in that moment, watching Piper's joy fill the room, watching Elena soften by degrees, Alexi felt something shift. Something fragile. Something that might just change all of them. Chapter 3. Through the Lens. The studio smelled faintly of coffee and old film, warm, lived in, like a place that held stories on every shelf. Piper darted past the polished counter to the back room where tripods stood like tall skeletons and cameras glittered under the light. Alexi trailed behind, watching her as one might watch a rare bird in flight, half afraid it would vanish if she blinked too hard. Piper pressed her palms against the edge of the workbench, her fingers twitching as if the tools and lenses were calling to her. Alexi crouched to her level. You see this one? She picked up a medium-format camera, heavy and beautiful, and placed it gently in Piper's hands. It doesn't just capture pictures. It captures the way you see the world. Piper ran her fingers along the grooves, careful, reverent. She lifted it to her eye, clumsy at first, then steadier when Alexi guided her grip. Now, Alexi murmured, pointing at the window where sunlight poured in, what do you see? Piper adjusted the focus, tongue peeking out in concentration. A moment later, the shutter clicked. She lowered the camera, and for the first time that morning, she laughed. Pure, unguarded. Elena pressed her hand to her mouth. Watching her daughter like this, alive, lit from within, made her feel as though she'd stumbled into a miracle she hadn't dared to pray for. Alexi glanced at her and caught it, the shimmer of tears, the wary hope, the exhaustion that had lived so long in Elena's bones it had become part of her. Their eyes held, just for a beat too long, and Alexi felt the faint, dangerous pull of recognition. Piper tugged at her sleeve, demanding her focus again. Can I take another? As many as you want, Alexi said softly. This room is yours today. Time bent strangely after that. Piper moved from camera to camera, her face shifting from wonder to fierce concentration. She asked questions, sharp, unexpected ones, about apertures and light, about why some lenses seemed to bend the world. Alexi answered patiently, marveling at the way the girl's mind leapt. By noon, there was a scatter of Polaroids on the table, the corner of a chair, the slant of sunlight across the wall, Alexi's hands, blurred mid-gesture. Imperfect, yes, but they breathed with curiosity. She sees things most people never notice, Alexi whispered under her breath. Elena, who had been silent most of the morning, finally spoke. She always has. But no one ever, Stayed long enough to see it with her. The words landed between them like a confession. Alexei wanted to say something about Yelena, about loss, about how sometimes the world breaks the brightest among us, but she held it back. Instead, she placed one of Piper's photos gently into Elena's hands. "She's not broken," Alexei said simply. "She's brilliant. The world just hasn't caught up to her yet." Elena's throat worked, her fingers trembling over the photo. She looked at Alexei, eyes dark, searching. Before anything else could be said, Piper called out, triumphant. "Look." She held up a picture of her mother, caught mid-smile, hair falling loose as she leaned against the doorway. The photograph was imperfectly framed, the light spilling too harshly across one side, but it was alive. It was real. For a moment, Elena saw herself the way Piper saw her. And it undid her. Alexei watched silently, heart clenching, as mother and daughter stared at each other across the space, linked not by struggle or disappointment, but by a single captured moment of love. And Alexei thought, with a strange certainty she couldn't quite name, "This is the beginning of something I can't walk away from." Chapter 4: A Camera to Carry Home. By late afternoon, the studio was littered with fragments of joy, test prints strewn across the workbench, smudges of fingerprints on glass, the air humming with the faint static of spent Polaroid film. Piper was radiant, hair falling loose from its ponytail, cheeks flushed from excitement, her eyes alive in a way Elena hadn't seen in years. Alexei leaned back against the counter, watching her. She could feel the ache of old memories stirring again, Yelena's laughter, the sting of her absence, but instead of drowning her, Piper's light steadied her. When the clock ticked closer to 5, Elena shifted restlessly, knowing it was time to go. "Piper," she said gently, "we need to thank Alexei and—" Before the words were finished, Alexei held out an old, worn Polaroid camera. The leather strap was frayed, the corners scuffed, but the soul of it remained steady, waiting. "This belonged to me when I first started," Alexei said. Her voice was soft, almost hesitant, as though she wasn't sure she should let it go. "It isn't perfect, but it's reliable. If you want, it can be yours now." Piper froze. Her small hands hovered, not quite daring to touch it. When Alexei placed it gently into them, her face lit up with such raw, unfiltered joy that Elena's knees almost buckled. "She can't," Elena began, but Alexei cut her off with a quiet certainty. "She can. Let her." Piper clutched the camera to her chest as if it were a living thing. Then, without warning, she rushed forward and hugged Alexei again. Fierce. Grateful. The same way she had in the park, but this time longer, deeper. Elena swallowed hard. Her eyes prickled, her heart squeezed, and for a breath she let herself believe this could be safe. The days that followed settled into an unexpected rhythm. Every morning, Piper begged to return to the studio. Every evening, she returned home carrying new photos like offerings, sunlight fractured through glass, the odd geometry of a lamppost, candid shots of Alexei mid-laughter when she thought no one was looking. For the first time in 12 years, Elena had to remind her daughter to sleep. Piper would fall asleep with the Polaroid camera on the nightstand, film scattered like confetti across her room. Alexei, patient and steady, opened the studio doors day after day. She gave Piper space to explore but never let her wander too far. She taught gently, never pushing, never demanding. And Piper bloomed. But with Piper's joy, another shadow stirred Elena's fear. Each time she dropped her daughter off, something inside her twisted tighter. It was too much. Too sudden. Too fragile. How could one stranger, this Russian woman with tired eyes and a haunted grace, accomplish in days what years of specialists, teachers, and therapies had failed to do? It frightened her. Because if Piper was tying her heart to Alexei, what would happen if Alexei ever walked away? Elena found herself lingering at the doorway longer, torn between gratitude and terror. Watching Piper glow. Watching Alexei smile. And wondering if she dared let this miracle stay. Chapter 5: Days in Bloom. The studio became a second home before any of them realized it. Piper moved through its rooms as though she had always belonged there, her Polaroid swinging from her neck, her laughter punctuating the steady rhythm of shutters clicking. She came alive behind the lens. Where she had once shied away from contact, now she pressed in close to capture Alexi's hands adjusting a tripod or the curve of Elena's smile when she thought no one was looking. She noticed details others missed, the uneven thread on a curtain hem, the reflection of light in spilled water, the fleeting curve of Alexi's grin when Piper surprised her. Alexi pinned some of Piper's best shots along the corkboard wall. By the end of the week, the board had transformed into a gallery of moments, crooked, imperfect, yet startlingly true. "She has an eye," Alexi murmured one afternoon, standing beside Elena as Piper darted across the room to fetch more film. Not just curiosity. Vision. Elena's throat tightened. Compliments about Piper were rare, fragile things, usually backhanded, weighed down with despite her autism or considering her challenges. But Alexi said it simply, without qualifiers. As if Piper was not broken at all, only extraordinary. It stirred something inside her. Gratitude, yes. But also unease. Because Alexi was becoming too much a part of their days. Too woven in. The changes at home were undeniable. Piper woke eager each morning, asking how soon they could leave. She filled the silence at dinner with talk of f-stops and light leaks, of frames and focus. Elena found herself listening, really listening, to her daughter in a way she hadn't been allowed to before. Sometimes, late at night, Elena would find herself scrolling through her phone, pausing on Alexi's business card and her contacts. Her fingers would hover, wanting to send a message, a thank you, or something less defined. But she never pressed send. Instead, she replayed the memory of the first time Piper hugged Alexi. The look on Alexi's face. That moment when something unspoken seemed to pass between them. It was dangerous. And she knew it. One Saturday afternoon, Piper insisted on showing Elena her latest photos in the studio. She tugged her mother by the hand into the back room, where Alexi had hung a string of fairy lights to soften the harshness of the white walls. "This one's my favorite," Piper announced proudly, holding up a Polaroid. It was of Elena, caught laughing at something Piper had said, head tipped back, hair spilling loose. She looked unburdened, younger, alive. Elena stared at it, stunned. She barely recognized herself. Alexi, leaning in the doorway, spoke softly. "That's how she sees you." The words struck deeper than they should have. Elena's chest constricted, and for a moment she couldn't breathe. Piper beamed, oblivious, already darting to take another shot. Alexi met Elena's eyes across the room. There was no smile there this time, only an intensity that made Elena's pulse stumble. She looked away too quickly, murmuring something about the time, about needing to head home. As they left, Elena glanced once more at the wall of Piper's photos. Among them, in quiet defiance, was a picture Piper had taken of Alexi. It was not perfect, slightly blurred, a strand of hair falling across her face, but Alexi looked softened, human, almost vulnerable. And that, Elena realized with a spike of panic, was exactly what terrified her most. Chapter 6: The Fracture. It began with something small. Piper had stayed later than usual at the studio, lost in the rhythm of her Polaroid, while Alexi showed her how to frame light through glass. The girl was radiant, breathless with excitement. When Elena arrived to collect her, she found Piper curled in the corner with Alexi. The two of them bent over a stack of photographs, their heads almost touching. Piper's laughter filled the space. It was the sound that should have healed her. Instead, it made Elena's stomach twist. "Piper," she called, sharper than she meant to. "Time to go." Piper looked up, startled, disappointment flickering across her face. "But just 5 more minutes?" Alexi glanced at Elena, something unspoken in her eyes, gentle, steady, but far too knowing. Elena's pulse stumbled. Too close. Too much. She stepped forward, her voice cool. "No. We need to go. Now." The disappointment deepened on Piper's face. She clutched the Polaroid camera to her chest, retreating inward the way she used to before Alexi cracked her open. Alexi rose slowly. She was just finishing a set. Enough. The word came out harsh, clipped, startling even herself. The silence that followed was heavy. Piper blinked rapidly, shrinking back. Alexei froze where she stood, her expression unreadable, though her hands curled loosely at her sides. Elena felt the room press in on her. Gratitude and fear, awe and panic, all colliding. She turned her gaze to Alexei, her voice shaking now with the weight of everything she couldn't say. You don't know her. You don't know us. You've known her for days, and suddenly you think you understand what's best? Where were you all those years I sat up at night, begging her to speak? Where were you when she screamed through every hug I tried to give her? The words came like a flood, bitter, jagged, impossible to stop. Alexei's joy tightened. Her eyes softened, though, and that, God help her, that only made it worse. She's my daughter, Elena choked out. And I can't let her need you more than she needs me. The silence cracked then, not from Alexei, not from Elena, but from Piper. Stop. The girl's voice rang out, fierce and trembling. She clutched the Polaroid tighter, tears welling in her eyes. I like it here. I like her. The room went still. Elena staggered back a step, guilt slamming into her, but pride too, warring inside her chest. She opened her mouth, but nothing came out. Alexei crouched slowly, not touching Piper, just grounding herself in her presence. Her voice was steady, low. It's all right, Malishka. It's all right. Elena couldn't bear it. The tenderness, the steadiness, it was everything she had fought for, everything she had failed at. Come on, Piper. Her voice cracked raw. We're leaving. For the first time since this fragile miracle began, Piper hesitated. Her gaze flicked between Alexei and her mother, torn. Then, with a small, strangled sound, she obeyed. She followed Elena out, the Polaroid dangling from its strap, knocking against her side like a wounded heart. Behind them, Alexei stood alone in the quiet studio, the fairy lights casting fractured shadows across the wall of photographs. And she wondered, with a hollow ache, if she had already lost them both. Chapter 7. The Silence Between. The days that followed were heavy with absence. Piper no longer bounded out of bed with questions about cameras or light. She no longer tugged on Elena's sleeve, begging to visit the studio. Instead, the old patterns returned: the silence, the withdrawal, the long hours spent curled into herself with the Polaroid clutched tight but unused. It was as if someone had switched off her light. Elena watched helplessly. She told herself this was safer, that pulling back was the right thing, but every time she caught Piper staring at the unopened box of Polaroid film, shame burned her throat raw. One night, she found Piper asleep with the old camera in her arms, the strap wrapped around her wrist like a lifeline. Elena sat on the edge of the bed, brushing her daughter's hair back, whispering apologies Piper couldn't hear. I'm sorry. I'm just so afraid. At the studio, Alexei moved through her days with practiced precision. She edited photos, directed her staff, prepared for an upcoming exhibit. But the silence of the space pressed heavier without Piper's chatter, without the scatter of imperfect Polaroids across her desk. She kept glancing at the corkboard where Piper's photos still hung. The images mocked her with their stubborn brightness. Elena's laughter caught mid-frame, sunlight splintering across glass, the crooked shot of Alexei herself, blurred but alive. Her chest tightened every time her gaze landed there. Yelena's ghost walked with her again, whispering of loss, of how fragile connection could be. Alexei told herself she had done the right thing, letting them go, giving Elena space. But when she closed her eyes at night, she heard Piper's voice, I like her, echoing in the hollow of her chest. And she knew space was not what any of them needed. On the third day, Elena's phone buzzed with a message from an unknown number. She opened it reluctantly. A photo. The Polaroid was of Piper, taken weeks before, sitting on the swing in the park. But this time, someone else had captured her, Alexei. The girl was framed against the fading sunlight, her expression soft, almost peaceful. The message was simple: she's extraordinary. Don't let her forget it. Elena's breath caught. Her thumb hovered over the screen, trembling. She wanted to delete it, to sever the cord that tied them. But instead, she saved it, as though she couldn't bear to let it go. That night, Piper finally spoke. Just one sentence, muffled against her pillow. "Why can't I go back?" The words broke Elena in half. She had no answer. Chapter 8. The door reopens. The morning light bled pale gold across the kitchen tiles. Elena stood by the counter, coffee cooling untouched in her hand, watching Piper trace patterns on the table with her finger. The Polaroid camera sat beside her untouched, like a relic of a better life. "Piper," she tried gently, "don't you want to take some photos today?" Piper didn't look up. "Not here." The words were sharp in their simplicity, cutting Elena straight through. For 3 days, she had watched her daughter fold inward, the spark that Alexei had kindled dimming with every hour. And every night, she replayed Piper's question, "Why can't I go back?" Her guilt was a weight that refused to let her breathe. She thought of the photo Alexei had sent, the one of Piper in the fading light, extraordinary even in stillness. She hadn't replied, but the image lived in her phone, in her mind, in her chest. Finally, unable to bear it, she spoke the words aloud. Do you want to go see Alexei?" Piper's head snapped up. Her eyes, wide and fragile, brimmed with cautious hope. "Can I?" The tremor in her voice shattered Elena. She set the coffee aside, leaned down, and brushed her daughter's cheek. "Yes, baby. You can." The studio door creaked open just after 10. Alexei looked up from her desk, expecting a delivery, a client, anything but them. When she saw Piper step in, clutching the Polaroid against her chest, her heart stuttered. "Malishka," she breathed, the endearment slipping out before she could stop it. Piper ran across the room and threw herself into Alexei's arms, the force of it almost knocking her back. Alexei held her tight, burying her face in Piper's hair, letting the ache of the last 3 days melt away. Over Piper's shoulder, her eyes met Elena's. There it was again, that storm. Gratitude, guilt, fear, and something softer, more dangerous. Elena's arms were crossed, her posture defensive, but her eyes betrayed her. They were glassy, searching. Alexei lowered herself, releasing Piper gently. "Want to take some photos, Malishka? I saved some film just for you." "Yes!" Piper shouted, already darting toward the back room. Her laughter filled the space again, bright and wild, leaving the 2 women in the doorway, caught in the silence. Elena exhaled, her voice low, tight. "She hasn't smiled like this since you. And I nearly ruined it." Alexei studied her, her tone steady. "Fear does that. But don't let it take her joy away. Or yours." The words hit too close. Elena flinched, then steadied herself. She wanted to argue, to defend her choices, but the sound of Piper's laughter cut through, undeniable. Alexei stepped closer, her presence grounding, dangerous. "You don't have to do this alone anymore, Elena." For a heartbeat too long, Elena let herself believe it. Then she looked away, forcing steel into her voice. "Just don't hurt her." "I won't," Alexei said softly. And in the quiet certainty of her voice, Elena almost believed her. Chapter 9. Shifting Light. The studio had changed. Or maybe it was just Piper. She filled the rooms with motion, skipping between cameras, her laughter echoing against the high ceilings. Every wall was slowly being overtaken by her photos, crooked, imperfect, alive. Clients who stopped by would pause, asking who the young photographer was, and Alexei would smile, pride slipping into her voice before she could stop it. "She has an eye." And she did. Piper saw the world as fractured beauty, light broken into pieces that only she could stitch back together. Elena watched, a mix of awe and something sharper. Each day she sat a little longer in the corner chair, not just dropping Piper off, but staying watching Alexei's patience, the way she leaned in to explain without condescension, the way she gave Piper permission to fail and try again. And more dangerously, watching the quiet gentleness beneath Alexei's steel edges. One afternoon, as Piper snapped pictures near the window, Alexei handed her a fresh pack of film. Their fingers brushed, and Elena's breath caught. She turned away quickly, pretending to straighten the stack of magazines on the counter. Alexei noticed. She always noticed. Later, when Piper was lost in her work, Alexei poured 2 coffees and set one down in front of Elena without a word. Elena hesitated before curling her hands around the mug. Their eyes met across the rim, silence stretching taut between them. "Why do you do this?" Elena asked suddenly, her voice low, almost defensive. "Why us? You didn't have to care." Alexei's gaze softened, though her answer carried an old weight. "Because once, someone I loved needed the same. And no one stayed long enough to give it." Yelena's name hovered unsaid, but Elena saw the shadow pass across Alexei's face. It stirred something in her chest, recognition, longing, a dangerous pull. Before she could respond, Piper interrupted with a squeal. "Look, Mama." She held up a Polaroid of Elena and Alexei sitting side by side, caught in candid profile, heads tilted toward each other as though the world outside didn't exist. The image hit Elena like a jolt. She saw herself softened, unguarded. She saw Alexei leaning close, eyes steady, protective. Together, they looked almost like a family. Heat rose to her cheeks. "Piper, delete, oh wait, you can't," she stammered, flustered. Alexei chuckled, low and husky. "Looks like she sees more than either of us are ready to admit." Their eyes held again, too long, too deep. Elena broke first, pushing back her chair, muttering something about needing air. She stepped outside into the cool dusk, her heart hammering against her ribs. But inside, Piper was still snapping photos. And Alexei, watching her from across the room, whispered to herself the truth she dared not yet speak aloud. "I'm already in too deep." Chapter 10. The Spark. The evening stretched longer than it should have. Piper had fallen asleep on the studio couch, her Polaroid camera still dangling from her wrist, a final print clutched between her fingers. The fairy lights along the wall flickered softly, casting the room in a warm glow. Elena moved to lift her daughter, but Alexei was already there, crouching beside the couch. She brushed a strand of hair from Piper's face, her touch so tender it stole Elena's breath. "I'll carry her," Alexei said quietly. Her accent deepened when she whispered, the words slipping like velvet. Elena hesitated, then nodded. She watched as Alexei lifted Piper effortlessly, one arm beneath her knees, the other cradling her shoulders. Piper stirred but didn't wake, her cheek pressed against Alexei's collarbone. For a moment, the world stilled. Elena followed as Alexei carried her daughter to the car. The night air was cool, scented faintly with rain, the city lights smudged into a hazy glow. Alexei lowered Piper gently into the back seat, buckling her in with a care that felt too much. More than anyone had ever given. When she straightened, they were standing close, too close, in the dim halo of the street lamp. Elena's voice cracked when she spoke. "You're too good with her." Alexei tilted her head, studying her. "Or maybe," she said softly, "I just see her the way she deserves." The words hit Elena like a hand to the chest. No one had ever said that, not teachers, not specialists, not even family. Always diagnosis, always challenge. Never see her. The silence stretched, thrumming. Elena's pulse stuttered as she realized how close they stood, how the warmth of Alexei's body seemed to reach for her. She caught the faintest trace of her perfume, something dark and clean, edged with spice. Her heart leapt against her ribs, reckless. "You shouldn't," she whispered, but the protest died even as it left her lips. Alexei's hand rose, slow, deliberate, brushing against her cheek. The touch was featherlight, tentative, as though asking permission. Elena froze, but she didn't pull away. Couldn't. Their eyes locked, blue ice and storm gray colliding, holding, daring. For a single, dangerous heartbeat, it would have been so easy to close the distance. And then, Piper shifted in her sleep, mumbling softly, breaking the moment like glass. Elena gasped, stepping back, her hand flying to her throat. I should go." Alexei let her, lowering her hand, her expression unreadable, but her eyes burned, quiet and certain. As Elena slid into the driver's seat, she risked one glance back. Alexei stood in the lamplight, still, steady, watching her. And Elena knew, with a clarity that terrified her, that this wasn't over. Not by a long shot. Chapter 11. The Edge of Denial. The next afternoon, the studio hummed with its usual rhythm, shutters clicking, paper rustling, the faint hum of printers in the background. Piper was sprawled on the floor, snapping Polaroids of a half-finished bouquet in the corner, humming to herself. But Elena wasn't watching her daughter. Her gaze kept drifting to Alexei, who was bent over a table, sleeves rolled to her elbows, strands of dark hair falling loose from her braid. There was strength in the way she moved, precision in her hands as she adjusted the focus on an old film camera. It was infuriating. Infuriating how natural Alexei looked here, as though she belonged in their lives. Infuriating how easily Piper glowed in her presence. Infuriating how Elena's chest tightened every time Alexei laughed under her breath. She tore her eyes away, only to find Alexei's already on her. That steady gaze, sharp, unflinching, made her feel naked in a way no touch ever had. Elena stood abruptly. "I need air." Alexei followed without a word, stepping outside into the alley behind the studio. The air was damp, rain having passed earlier, the stones slick beneath their shoes. Elena turned on her, voice sharp to mask the tremor in it. "You need to stop." Alexei leaned against the wall, arms crossed, calm as ever. "Stop what?" This, Elena gestured wildly between them, frustration spilling over. "Whatever this is. My daughter is finally smiling, and I can't risk you walking in here, lighting up her world, and then what? Leaving? Breaking her? Breaking me?" The last word slipped out before she could catch it. Her breath hitched, shame flushing hot across her skin. Alexei's eyes softened, but she didn't move. "I'm not going anywhere." "You can't promise that." "No," Alexei admitted. She pushed off the wall, stepping closer. Her voice lowered, deepened. "But neither can you. Life doesn't give promises. It only gives moments. And you," she stopped inches away, her breath mingling with Elena's. "You're terrified of wanting this moment, aren't you?" Elena's hands shook. "You don't know me." Alexei tilted her head, studying her. "I know enough." The space between them crackled. Elena's heart pounded so hard she thought it might break through her ribs. Every instinct screamed to step back, to retreat into safety. But she didn't move. Alexei's hand lifted, brushing against her jaw again, firmer this time, deliberate. Elena's breath stuttered, her body betraying her with the way it leaned, just barely into the touch. Their eyes locked, the world narrowing to nothing but the dangerous pull between them. "Tell me to stop," Alexei whispered. Elena's lips parted, but no words came. The silence was her answer. Alexei leaned closer, their mouths a breath apart, heat sparking between them. And then the studio door banged open. Piper's voice rang out, cheerful and oblivious. "Mama, look. I took a picture of the rain." Elena jerked back, stumbling a step, her cheeks blazing. Alexei closed her eyes, steadying herself, then turned toward the door with a small, controlled smile. The moment shattered, but the fire lingered. Elena knew, as she followed Piper back inside with her heart still hammering, that she could no longer pretend. The danger wasn't that Alexei might leave. The danger was that she might stay. Chapter 12. The Ghost in the Lens. Rain beat softly against the wide studio windows, a steady rhythm that filled the silence between them. Piper slept curled on the couch, her Polaroid clutched to her chest, as though even in dreams she refused to let it go. Elena stood near the window, arms folded tight. She felt Alexei's presence behind her, steady and unbearable all at once. "You should take her home," Alexei said gently. "I know," Elena whispered. She stared at the blur of city lights beyond the glass. "But every time we leave here, I feel like I'm tearing her out of herself." "Like this," she gestured to the studio, to the fairy-lit walls, to the photos, "is where she's meant to be." Alexei was quiet for a moment. Then her voice shifted, low and rougher than Elena had ever heard. "I had a sister. Yelena." The name landed heavy in the room. Elena turned, startled. Alexei wasn't looking at her, She was staring past, into some distance only she could see. She was a year older than me, but her mind, it worked differently. Brilliant in ways no one understood. Mocked in ways no one deserved. My parents homeschooled her, tried to protect her, but the world was cruel. Alexi's hand curled loosely at her side. One winter, when she was 18, she went out with a friend. The road was icy. The car never made it back. Her voice broke on the last words. She closed her eyes, exhaling sharp. 17 years, and it still feels like yesterday. Losing her carved something out of me. And when I saw Piper, her voice cracked again, softer this time. It was like Yelena was standing in front of me. And I swore I would not fail her twice. Elena's throat tightened, tears pressing hot. Alexi. I don't get close to people. Alexi finally looked at her then, eyes storm-dark raw. I don't let them in. But Piper, she pushed through. And you, she swallowed hard. You terrify me more than anything. Because I want to stay. And wanting means I could lose everything again. The confession shattered the air between them, bare and bleeding. Elena stepped closer, drawn by something deeper than choice. She lifted her hand, almost without realizing, brushing against Alexi's arm. You haven't failed her. Not Piper. Not me. Not yet. Alexi's eyes closed at the touch, her jaw tight, her control fraying. The rain outside quickened, drumming harder against the glass. For a moment, it felt like they were both standing at the edge of something vast, dangerous, inescapable. And neither of them stepped back. Chapter 13. The Surrender. The storm deepened as night pressed close, thunder murmuring low in the distance. Piper slept on, oblivious, her small breaths steady in the quiet. Elena and Alexi stood close, too close for too long. The confession still hung between them, heavy as the rain. Elena's voice was unsteady. You think you're the dangerous one. But you're not. I am. Because I can't keep pretending I don't feel this. Her words shook, but they were truth, raw and unshakable. Alexi reached up, fingers brushing against Elena's jaw, gentler than a whisper. Then don't. The last thread snapped. Elena surged forward, their lips colliding in a kiss that carried all the fear, the grief, the longing they had tried so hard to silence. It was fierce at first, desperate, years of restraint unraveling in seconds. Alexi steadied it, deepened it, one hand sliding into Elena's hair, anchoring her. The other pressed to the small of her back, pulling her close until there was no space left between them. Elena clung to her, surrendering not just her body, but the barricades around her heart. For the first time in years, she allowed herself to fall. When they finally broke apart, breathless, Alexi rested her forehead against hers. This changes everything. Elena's lips curved, a fragile smile trembling through her tears. Good. I'm tired of everything staying the same. In the corner, Piper stirred, murmuring softly in her sleep, her Polaroid slipping from her fingers onto the couch. Both women glanced toward her, then back to each other, and in that moment they knew this wasn't just about them. It was about all three of them, bound now in something fragile and unbreakable. Elena pressed one last kiss against Alexi's lips, softer this time, reverent. Whatever comes next, we'll face it together. And for the first time in 17 years, Alexi believed she could. Epilogue, framed in light. 6 months later, the studio looked different. Not larger, not grander, just fuller. The corkboard wall was covered in Polaroids, Piper's work spilling outward in every direction. Shots of pigeons mid-flight, raindrops racing down glass, her mother laughing with her head thrown back, Alexi frowning in concentration over a camera she was repairing. Imperfect, alive, stitched together like pieces of a new world. In the corner, Piper sat cross-legged on the floor, showing a client, an older man with kind eyes, how her Polaroid worked. She spoke fast, her hands animated, no hesitation in her voice. Every so often, she'd look over her shoulder to make sure her mother and Alexi were watching. And they were. Always. Elena leaned against the counter, her hand brushing against Alexi's as they stood side by side. The touch was casual now, unhidden, but every time their fingers twined, it still sent a quiet shock through her. "You realize," Elena murmured, her lips curving, "she's becoming the star of this place." Alexei chuckled softly, her eyes never leaving Piper. "She always was. The world just finally caught up." Elena turned to study her, this woman who had entered her life by accident, who had broken it open, who had forced her to face fear and taught her how to surrender. The weight Alexei carried was still there, grief never truly vanished, but it no longer ruled her. It wove through her like thread and fabric, part of her, but not the whole. And Elena loved her for it. Piper snapped a photo then, spinning around to wave it triumphantly. "Mama! Alexei! Look!" They crossed the room together, hands brushing as they walked. Piper held up the photo, the three of them caught in a reflection in the studio's window. Elena's arm around Alexei, Piper wedged between them, grinning wide. It wasn't centered. The angle was odd. The light bled across the edges. It was perfect. Elena felt her throat tighten. Alexei slid an arm around her waist, steady, grounding, her lips brushing her temple in the faintest kiss. "Family," Piper said firmly, holding the Polaroid out like proof. Elena smiled through tears. "Family," she echoed. And for once, the word didn't frighten her. It felt like coming home.
Long before time dared to measure itself, there was the veil, a shimmer between what is seen and what is sensed. From the ink of forgotten creation we rose, not born but bound. We are the dreamers, the broken, the brave. We bleed through fiction, we breathe between lines. We are the ones who ache when a story ends and rise again when a new one begins. You, who have found this space, you are not lost, you are veil-bound. And the stories here, they were written for you.